I was his victim, but I am not a victim. You have to hang on to that spark inside of you because it's there, and it might be like really deep down inside of you that says like, actually, no, you're not here for that. You're here for so much bigger than that.
This is a very sensitive episode, guys, where we discuss things like sexual and physical abuse. So in case you may be triggered, I just needed to warn you ahead of time. Now, let's get into the episode.
You've jumped through 10-story buildings. You've had your face smashed into glass as a stunt woman. Let me just preface that. So I think of you as being a freaking badass that doesn't take shit, that knows how to hold her own, that isn't ever going to be pushed around. And yet in reading your book and your story, I want to start with a quote that you say, when you've been abused, it's easy to stay in unhealthy relationships. You stay because all the wrong things feel normal and comfortable to you. You tell yourself you're just lucky someone loves you. So if you don't mind taking me back to when, I guess, when it really started for you.
Yes. The abuse started around 2 or 3. And when it starts that early in your life, you don't know any different. And it's how I just thought life was. This is what families must do. This is how things must be. This is how we operate, because you don't have anything to compare it to, because it's the life that you grew up in. And both of my parents, my father, was in Vietnam, and he also experienced like physical abuse as a child growing up. And my mom experienced sexual abuse, and then they got together and got married and had 4 children. And then their trauma just bled onto us. And I truly believe that because of their trauma, they weren't able to stand strong within themselves and be the parents that I needed them to be. And so in turn, my abuse then started happening.
God, okay. Thank you. I know this is an easy conversation, so I really appreciate your transparency and vulnerability. But you don't remember any of this until you start getting older. And so talk to me about that, because when I think through the behaviors that we have, maybe the unhealthy behaviors that we have by going with somebody that isn't right for us, you were cutting, you had body dysmorphia where you were bulimic. All of these behaviors stemmed from what you've just laid out, but you didn't know that. So actually talk to me, if someone's listening right now, what are the things that they can maybe start to pay attention to start to process their childhood, that they may not have realized are contributing to how they show up today?
I think that when you find yourself in bad relationships, and that could be with friends, spouses, partner. I mean, it's every relationship in your life. And when I look back on the relationships that I was having in my 20s, it's a completely different world. It's like I would take any love that I could get, no matter what that love looked like. If someone said they loved me, but they were treating me in awful ways, I believe they loved me anyway. Now I can look back and see that. But when I was in it, it just felt like, well, this person loves me. They're telling me they love me, and they're hanging around me and they're with me. But yet when we're together, it's this, abusive, not communicative, loving relationship, And so I think that shows up in so many ways. For me, my cutting was something that I did calling attention, like I needed attention. And I speak about that in the book, about how being hurt on the outside for me, I think cutting is different for everybody. A lot of people do it where you can't see it. I did it on my face. And for me, it was calling out for help in ways that I wasn't feeling like I was getting it. And my parents weren't recognizing, or they weren't validating the pain that I was in when I did have my memories and I did vocalize what was going on, or try to vocalize what I was feeling. And then that turned into bulimia. And it wasn't even that I was bulimic because I was overweight, because I've always been tiny. It was more, I needed to feel control of my body. And my body felt so out of control. And I felt like I never had control over my body, and my body didn't belong to me. So it was almost like my bulimia became me needing to purge him out of me, my abuser out of me, more than it was about calories, which later in life it turned into that. But when I first started, it wasn't about that.
God, yeah, and then just thinking through what the things that had happened to you, how that really did codify in you what you probably thought validation looked like.
Yes.
So I believe your grandfather was abusing you up to 4 times a week for like 7 years.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And he was saying that it was because you were beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, he was strangling you as well as sexually abusing you.
Mm-hmm.
Go, I'm trying to be very delicate. How on earth do you build your self-esteem back from that? Where for 7 years, you're being taught that. And then after that, you get denied the reality of it.
Yes. I needed to walk away from my family in order to really heal, because I realized that it was a whole system that was allowing the abuse to happen and a whole system that was continuing the abuse. And our abuse wasn't continued in the way of sexual abuse. It was continued in the way of narcissism, of making fun of each other, of just being unkind, of not being, back then we didn't have words for it, which I'm so grateful to have the vocabulary now of just boundaries. I didn't even know that was a word. I mean, we called it, we're just an enmeshed family. We're just enmeshed, and that's what we called it. But it was completely us having zero boundaries, and we weren't healthy within our own family system. Even after my grandfather died, it was like everything sort of exploded, and even into adulthood and then into becoming a parent, which was a huge catalyst for me to really start healing, is when I became a mom. And I feel like I was born with something inside of me that is sad in a way, because a lot of times people will say, well, I wouldn't be where I am if this didn't happen. I am who I am because this happened to me. And I used to say that a lot, and I used to believe it. And now I don't feel that way anymore. I feel a lot of grief around who would I have been if this didn't happen to me? Like, what would my potential have been? Even though you can look at my life and say, oh, she's had a great career and she wrote a book and all these things, I still have so much pain on a daily basis. It's not something that goes away ever, as I'm learning. Sadly, I thought I would be able to at some point be like, I'm healed. And it just doesn't work that way. It's a constant work in progress, and it's a constant, for me, triggers, and having to work on yourself and having to do the work on a daily basis. And I'm grateful for everyone who I've been able to connect with who has made me feel less crazy, because for a long time I just felt like, oh, I'm crazy. And I know that everyone has that spark in them. It's just finding it and believing that you're better than what you were told you were. You have to hang on to that spark inside of you, because it's there, and it might be like really deep down inside of you that says like, actually, fucking no, you're not here for that. You're here for so much bigger than that. And I think I held on to that spark, and that's what has enabled me to do as much as I've done.
Thank you for so much of your honesty. All right, I want to take some things that you just said one by one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, you said how you told yourself that, well, I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for that. That definitely feels like a protective mechanism. Mm-hmm. Because by looking back and say, well, who would I be if this didn't happen, may be so painful for most people to look at, that I actually understand why that's where you started. And I understand why a lot of people at home right now may be telling themselves that story. Yes, but who would I be? I wouldn't be able to help this person if I didn't go through it. Totally get that. But to your point, it's going to be a lifelong journey.
Yes.
And once you're able to embrace, I think, that life, I'm not saying it's easy. By golly, Jesus, it's not. But if you're able to embrace it and unpack exactly what you just said, it was like, well, hang on a minute. I think I do have to consider what would my life have looked like if my grandfather wasn't here, if he hadn't done that to me, if my father wasn't a narcissist? Because then you can unpack that. And by unpacking it, to your point, you can start to heal. Now, there's other thing that you said is that you had to start distancing yourself from your family. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about your Aunt Pat. And then talk to me about how you had a moment where you could actually address this with your grandmother.
Yes. My Aunt Pat was an amazing human, and she was an amazing writer and always wanted to be published. And she's died a few years back, but I use her words a lot in the book. And so I feel like I finished what she started. She was the first one to speak out about my grandfather when she was 9 years old and told her mother that she was being abused or that he was touching her, doing these things to her. And it was dismissed, and life went on, and he went on to hurt many other people, including me, because I obviously wasn't alive then. And, you know, there were so many adults, and this is the craziest part about my abuse, is 90% of the time that it was happening, the house was full of adults. And my grandmother was completely aware of what he was doing, and she didn't do anything about it because she had walked in multiple times. She was just a horrible, talk about a narcissist, like a horrible human being. And she was very much, and I talk about this in the book, as long as we look good on the outside, who cares what's happening on the inside? That's how I grew up. It was very much like, you know, as long as we have our face on, is what she always used to say, and our heels on and our dress on, no one ever tended to what was going on inside of ourselves and what was happening, what was actually happening. So they were ultra focused on the look of everything instead of the reality of everything. And so it was just swept under the carpet, which has now become as big as a city block, I would say.
And as an adult, though, you had an opportunity to talk to her, right?
Yes.
And I believe the quote is, you wanted to say to her, why do you value illusion over truth?
Mm-hmm. It was always interesting to me, which is why I was very vocal with my family, because her line to me was always, I never not believed you. And to me, that was fascinating, because I said to her in our conversation, don't you find that odd? And aren't you admitting basically your part in all of this? Because if you are telling me that you never not believed me, you're telling me that you believe that your husband was fully capable of doing the things that he did. And that was the last conversation I ever had with her, because I knew that I was never going to have a real conversation with her, and it was never going to go anywhere except in one big circle, which is what I felt like was starting to happen with my family members as well.
Talk to me in that moment then about cutting yourself off. So like when I think about where you started from, not having the voice, to then saying that to your grandmother, which is super freaking powerful and damn brave of you, by the way. So I just want to, applaud you for that, for actually saying that to her. And then being able to walk away and never have that person in your life again. Did that just come at, you just knew that until you could break this cycle, you weren't able to have healthy relationships or heal from it? Because the reason why I ask is, I know there's so many people listening right now. I have someone in my life, very specifically that I'm thinking of, that has been sexually abused, and yet they still talk to the person that abused them. So for you, it was the breaking away. Talk to me about how you decided that, so that if someone's listening at home, how they can actually walk away and feel good and not feel guilty, because I'm sure that it was a bunch of guilt behind that. And then, if you don't mind starting there.
Yeah. It's very common, and I've come across so many people who have been abused by their father or even mother and still have a relationship with them. Thankfully, my abuser died and I never had to deal with that. But I think it's very normal, honestly. I think you come into this world, and Dr. Mattei talks about this a lot, which is like attachment versus authenticity. and you're attached to these people. These are the people that are supposed to take care of you. They're the people that you're born and they're it. Like, you're in a house with them. They're the ones who are feeding you and doing all the things. So I think when they treat you in such an abusive way, you get to a point where it's really hard to walk away from them. I have someone in my life like that as well, who is still in relationship with her father, and he's been abusive to her. And I think it's just broken her down so much that she doesn't know how to walk away. And I think that that's a very common way to feel and a very common thing to do until you actually do it. Mm-hmm. And it was a very slow process for me. It kind of happened one person at a time. When I got my book deal, my one sister just completely stopped talking to me. I haven't talked to her in 3.5 years. That was her way of, like, hard stop. I don't want this out in the world, and this is how I'm gonna punish you for speaking your truth, which just shows how much trauma she still has and hasn't dealt with. Mm-hmm. And then my younger sister, when I told her about the book deal, her words to me were, "You're gonna ruin all of the children's lives by telling this story." I felt like I needed everyone to tell me it was okay for me to write this book. And so I sort of went around and made all these phone calls, like, is everyone gonna be okay with me telling my story? Which I realized in retrospect was my trauma showing up, just needing validation from people that I didn't need validation from. I don't need validation from anyone to tell my fucking story. I can tell my story when I want and how I want and the way I want. And this is how I wanted to do it. And it just made me realize how much trauma was still occurring in my family. Mm-hmm. And so I slowly stopped talking to, kind of happened one at a time. And then my dad, I chose to walk away from my father. That was my choice. My two sisters walked away from me. And then there was an event that happened where my daughter was emotionally hurt by my sisters. And that was a very big hard stop for me.
Mm-hmm. Don't mess with the mama's kids, right?
No, and also just, we have so much trauma in this family that no one wants to look at still. No one wants to see how it's bleeding out onto our children. And obviously, none of us are sexually abusing our children, but it's coming out in other ways because that's what it does. It does not go away. And no matter how much you want to stuff it down and repress it and push it down, it will come out and you get triggered, and then you're parenting from your triggers, and you're not raising your child in their truth, and you're not giving them the opportunity to be the person that they're meant to be because of what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that to my daughter. She's gonna have the life I never had, even if it kills me.
Wow. So how did you, oh God, okay, I want to pass this down a little more if you don't mind. So you said obviously your sisters stopped talking to you. I think that almost makes it a little easier, maybe.
Yes.
But you said you walked away from your father, and you said earlier that your dad's definitely a narcissist.
Yes.
So identifying these patterns, right, going back to where we started, where you ended up in a marriage with somebody who was a narcissist. So we've barely touched the surface, but because of your grandfather and your father, how the hell do you then find the courage to walk away from your father, who I believe probably plays into the attachment of an unhealthy relationship?
Yes. My father, when he got out of the war, he started a construction business, and he was a very 9-to-5 guy, hardworking guy, blue collar guy. And I was not that kid. I was like, I want to be creative, and I want to dance, and I want to do gymnastics, and I don't want to be in this box that society tells me that I should be in. And he was very uncomfortable with that. So it was very made fun of my choices of dancing, and of, even when I got into Alvin Ailey and, like the best school in the United States, it just, nothing was ever good enough until the moment he saw me on television. And then that was like, oh, look at my daughter, look at everything that she's done. And at that time in my life, It's like, oh, he finally accepts me. I'm finally good enough for him. And now I'm in a space where I can say that was extremely abusive behavior as a father, especially now as a mother, to put my daughter down and basically try to crush her dreams is basically what it was. And I did it anyway. And despite his making me feel like I was making all the wrong choices. When I walked away from him, I was able to see things in such a different way that I would have never been able to see if I stayed in relationship with him. And I think also when you do stay in relationships with these people, you will never see it for what it truly is. You never will, because you're having conversations with them. You're still being dragged back. I remember one of my really good friends who wrote the foreword for the book. She said to me, you know, Kim, it's like you're sitting on this wall and you have one leg over and you have the other leg over on the other side and your family's tugging at your ankle and you're trying so hard to get over the wall. And she said, if you just release that, you will get over the wall and so many things will open up for you. And that's exactly what happened.
So having the distance made you realize you needed the distance.
Yes.
And was there a closure? Was it like, I'm never speaking to you again, Dad? Or?
With my father, no. I just blocked him from my phone because my dad is relentless. And I knew what I needed to do finally for myself. And I was no longer playing by his rules anymore.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
Did you have any guilt around that initially?
A lot of grief, which I still have, which I didn't expect to have or I didn't expect to happen. I think when you start the journey of healing, when you truly start the journey of healing, you cannot be around toxic people. You recognize it very quickly, and it's just not something that you are able to allow in your space because you're on this healing journey and you want only the best things for yourself and the best things for your family. And when that toxicity kind of starts to come in, whether that's from a friend or a friend you might have had for 20 years that now no longer kind of fits in your world anymore because their life might be coming from a toxic space and you just can't be there anymore if you want to truly be your authentic self and not be your attached self, which is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I choose to be authentic to myself, and it feels really good to be able to choose that, and it feels really good to be able to honor that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't come with pain and grief and sadness, and it doesn't mean that you're not walking away from people that you love very much as well. It's not like I hate my family. It's just that I know that they're not healthy for me, but I love them. And I hold compassion for them and I hold space for them and I wish them nothing but healing and love and all of the positive things. But I know that they're not healthy for me.
Okay, so taking all that, when I think about where you start from, because you said that the toxic, like you have to get rid of the toxic people in your life. But to your point, if you don't even realize they're toxic in the first place because you've been groomed, I believe is the word you use, to believe this is what love looks like. So how did you make that first initial oh, is this person toxic? I'm just trying to give the tools for somebody at home right now. And I know it's very messy. So there's never going to be one interview that we can solve everything. But I'm trying to think through, and you even said, oh God, I wish I had the quote, but it's something like, you're so afraid to pull at the thread because everything's going to come loose.
Like if we pull a thread, it's going to unravel us completely.
And so I worry that people right now are just not pulling at the thread. How does someone start to pull at that thread? And in fact, actually, I'm going to use another quote of yours, because even in pulling at the thread, let's even just say it's therapy. You went to therapy and you had the therapist say to you, oh, honey, do you know how many women like you are shooting heroin on the street corner? You should feel proud just to be alive.
Yes.
So talk to me about pulling at the thread and how the hell you don't get stuck when you get hurdles like that ridiculous therapist.
Yes, and that's so common, and that was so frustrating for me. And that was a time in my life where I had no money. I was not, in the business yet. I was really struggling. I went to a therapist on a sliding scale, so it was what I could afford. And when she said that to me, it was my spark. It was the voice that's like really deep down. I feel like when you've had trauma, but there's this little voice that's telling you like, keep going, that you need to listen to, but it's muted by your trauma. So it's very deep down in there. So I think a lot of people, it's easier for them to just sort of live the life that they're living. And it's very difficult to pull at the thread and say, no, this is not okay. And I am going to be different, and I'm going to do different, and I'm going to be better and do better. It's not an easy process. And it's a vulnerable thing to do, to decide to go to therapy. And then you go to therapy and it's this horrible therapist. And then it's sort of like, okay, I just give up.
Right.
If you want something in life, and I think this goes for your emotional state too, if you really want something in life, do something every day towards it. Every day, do something that's going to help you get to the next step. Even if it's the littlest thing. Even if it's just taking a walk or starting to meditate or doing something that you've never done before. Step out of your comfort zone and not do the same pattern that you've been doing that clearly deep down is not working for you. And it is a hard thing to do. Taking the first step can feel really impossible. And it felt really impossible to me. I got into a marriage that was a really bad marriage, that if I would have stayed in, my life would be completely different than it is now. And he had said something to me about starting to start a family. And that's when I divorced him, because I knew that I was not going to bring children into the world with him, and that it wasn't going to be a safe space for them. And that was my hard stop for me. I think it's different for everybody. The journey is different for everybody. Some days you're going to feel like you're moving backwards and that nothing is progressing, and that you're just like, fuck it, I'm just going to call my sister, or like, I'm just going to, just go back to the way things were before. But I never did, because I knew it wasn't the right thing deep down. And my daughter was a huge part of that for me.
Yeah, God, thank you for that. I think of your book as being partly that thread for people, that if people actually read it, that hopefully it would give them that encouragement to pull the thread a little and not be afraid of everything falling apart. So talk to me actually about your ex-husband, if you don't mind, because I believe you were both, was he a survivor as well?
Yes.
So talk to me about that, and then what that dynamic looked like, and then we'll go from there.
Yes. He was a survivor, and we met, we were performing together and we met. And that's kind of what we connected on, was our stories of abuse. And he was a really great person. I mean, he is a really great person, but together we were like a ticking time bomb. I mean, all of our trauma just was coming out on each other. And that's just what happens. And that's what I'm saying about the healing path and the journey of healing and getting help and trying to get to a better space. Because when you're in a relationship like that, I was with him for 7 years, and it was every day it was a disaster, but I didn't recognize it. It just felt like this is what relationships are. My parents fought all the time, so this is just what relationships are. We slam doors, we yell at each other, he was a drinker, and so was my dad. And it just felt really familiar to me. And it just felt like home, which is really sad. And I think that's why most of us stay in these bad relationships, because either we were brought up that way, this person reminds us of our dad, we're trying to fix them because we couldn't fix our dad, so we're trying to do what we couldn't do with our father, with our partner, and then the cycle just continues.
So how did you obviously said about your kid, which this is another question I have. So I've decided not to have children. I'm not sure if you know that. And so I'm always thinking, so many women, that's the pivot. Oh, well, it was my kid. You know, I got out of this because of my child. I did this because of my child. But us women, we don't necessarily do it for ourselves. Help me think through that. And if you didn't have your child, or if your ex-husband didn't say, oh, let's start a family, what would that future have looked like? And now in hindsight, what would you do differently?
I would have left him anyway. At the time, I had found a really great therapist, and I was getting really great help. And she was helping me see the patterns that I was repeating in my life. And she, I think, knew probably the first day she talked to me that I needed a divorce, because I went to her when I was married. And I felt like I was trying to figure things out, and I don't think he liked that very much. And that's what you'll find too with toxic relationships, is when you start growing, the person that's not growing and the person that's really toxic will make you feel like you're crazy. And because of that, I went on Zoloft for like 2 years, and I think I was on like the highest dosage or something. And I just felt like a piece of toast, like literally. That's how I describe it, because I'm an emotional person. I cry a lot. I'm a crier. And I think it was comfortable for him because I didn't talk back. I didn't push back. I didn't say anything. And so when I got off the Zoloft is when I really started feeling my feelings again. And then I got a really good therapist. And she, at the end of the day, was really the reason that I left him. Like, she made me see a lot of things that I wouldn't have seen if I wasn't seeing her.
What were the sort of things that she was asking you to make you see those things?
Just what love really looks like. And she let me sort of draw my own conclusions by the way that she asked her questions to me, and made me come to the realization of where I had come from and why I was making the choices that I was making, and how toxic they were for me, and how I wasn't going to go anywhere but down with him in this relationship. And so ultimately, yes, him saying that about kids was kind of like the light bulb in my head, but she was the one who really made me see things for what they were, and really forced me to be honest with myself about what I was actually doing and what relationship I was allowing in my life and allowing to have.
And did she remind you then that you had that spark inside you who could change, who could do different things? Because I've met many people that think, well, it's too late, I'm too old in my life, I've made my bed and now I have to sleep in it. I've been with this person for all this time. So many people have a story they're telling themselves of why they're staying. But it doesn't seem like you did. It seemed like you were kind of open to writing your own story as you were going along.
Yes. I think that happened very slowly, though. It's not something, right? It's not something that happens overnight. I think it's a slow process, but it's an intentional one, and it's something that you have to be intentional about and be really aware of what's going on. And there were many instances where we would be in an argument or something would be happening, and I'm in my head going, okay, this isn't safe. This doesn't feel good. I knew it didn't feel good. And the same with my sexual abuse as a child. I knew there was something inside of me that knew that it was wrong. And I think we all do when we're in abusive, whether they're relationships, whether, it's sexual abuse, narcissism, whatever it is that's going on in our life, there's a part of us that knows it's not healthy. There's a part of us that knows that it's not the right thing. But I think what overrides that is that we don't think that we deserve better. And so that overrides all of it. And so then we're just kind of stagnant. And I don't think it's an actual conscious thing. I think it's a subconscious thing that we just don't believe we're good enough. And why don't we believe we're good enough? Well, because at some point in our life, we were told that we weren't good enough. And so we actually believe that. And so we'll stay in situations that hurt us because we don't actually believe we deserve better.
Yeah, oh God, especially having you from the age of 2, girl, like where you've come and to build up your courage and your self-esteem and like a backbone, I'm not even sure what, like, it's so freaking impressive when I think through how many people stay stuck. And then in your book, you talk about just like your daily triggers where, and I have so much empathy for people right now that may not even realize, oh, you're just constantly getting triggered all the time. And until you do the deep work of going back, of eliminating these people from your life, dealing with the trauma, I can only imagine that you're always going to be triggered by these daily things. And so I heard you say something like, the smell of Old Spice. So if you don't mind talking to me about that.
Yes, he always wore it, so it's a big trigger for me. And the ocean is a big trigger for me because I was suffocated many times. So me feeling out of breath is very triggering for me. And when those happen and you're not aware of them, I do a lot of IFS work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
What's it stand for?
It's internal family systems, Dr. Richard Schwartz. So he believes, and I probably won't articulate this exactly, sorry, Dr. Schwartz, properly, but the way that I feel like the work is done is that he works with the parts of you that feel abandoned, grief, sadness, whatever that is. He believes that you kind of get stunted in that time. So for me, I was at 2 years old, abused and, almost killed. And so when I'm triggered from that space, I react as a 2-year-old, or I react as a 7-year-old, or I react as a 9-year-old. And you can feel that when after it happens and you're like, whoa, what the heck? Like, where did that come from? Like, that was a way overreaction. Or you think about it in a few hours, because you get yourself into such a state where you're just, screaming or freaking out. But it's coming from like a child space that was never healed. So it's coming from your 7-year-old space that felt abandoned by your parents because they didn't, they weren't there for you or whatever it is. And so I do a lot of that work as well. And I find that to be extremely helpful. Now I can recognize when something happens if I'm triggered, and I can take a step back and take a breath. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I do totally get triggered. And I think that will be the case forever. But I can now recognize it more, be able to take a step back and take a breath, or just go in my room, be by myself and kind of work through it, and then come out and be able to deal with the situation in a different way.
What are you, when you said that you're able to identify now, what is it? Is it the things that lead up to you being triggered that you can identify? Or is it the trigger itself when it happens?
It's the trigger itself when it happens. Because I feel like it happens really fast when you're triggered.
Right.
And it was interesting because with one of my sisters, I said something like, when I talked to her about the book, and she was the one who said about me ruining everyone's life, which I actually think I'm saving everyone's life because I'm giving them a gift of, this is why your family is what it is, and why you were brought up in whatever way you were brought up in. I used the word shame with her, and I said to her, I don't have shame around what happened to me, and I'm okay talking about it. And she lost it on the phone and just started screaming, I don't have shame, and just, was completely triggered by it. And I said to her, I didn't say you had shame. I said, I don't have shame. But she was so triggered by the word that in her head, she heard, you feel shameful. And, there's a lot of shame around abuse, and we have a lot of it and hold a lot of it, and sometimes don't even realize it. I don't think I realized how much shame I had around it until I started really doing the work myself, and how much shame I felt with what happened to me.
I'd love to touch on the shame part, but before we actually do, I also heard you say about breastfeeding was a trigger. And so that's why, like, I really want to talk about the trigger part first, because there were things that I wouldn't have expected, right? Like, I can kind of see, oh yeah, okay, if he was wearing Old Spice, you smell Old Spice, I get it. But there are the unexpected triggers, and I'm fascinated, if you don't mind talking about when you were breastfeeding and then how you worked through it, because I think that if it's expected, maybe we accept it more in ourselves, but when it's unexpected and you react, you're kind of like, oh God, is there something wrong with me?
Right.
So talk to me about the breastfeeding.
Yeah. I think I came from a place just with my story that, and I think I needed to have this space where I was so angry with what had happened to me and so angry with what my life was that I was like, you're not going to win. And that kept me going for a really long time. And a lot of my healing came from that space, which maybe isn't the healthiest space, but it helped me in a way. Mm-hmm. And the breastfeeding was a part of that. It's a sensory thing. So when I started breastfeeding my daughter, I started having memories and started being really anxious, and I could feel her anxiousness. I could see, like, her face would change when I was feeding her. And it was like the biggest gift that he took from me. I felt like I had finally made this life for myself and made all the right choices. And now I can't even feed my kid. So that was really hard. But reading about it and knowing that I wasn't the only woman that had experienced it made me feel better. And then I had the moment of like, fuck you, you're not gonna win. I'm gonna still do this in the way that I have to. So I couldn't feed her anymore because I didn't want to put my anxiousness on her, because I could feel her body tense up just from my body tensing up. So I would pump and I would like do weights while I was pumping.
That's amazing. That was for your mindset.
And I would like look at myself in the mirror and I would just be like, fuck you. Like, you're not gonna win. You're not winning this. I don't care. Like, this one thing that of all the things that you've taken from me, and now you're gonna try to take this from me, it's not happening. And so, yeah, I just did weights. It made my arms really great.
Where's the plus?
Which was a plus. And I was able to look at myself in the mirror and talk to myself. And it's not an easy thing to do, because it was, 4 or 5 times a day where I was doing that, and she's in the other room and I'm not able to experience this experience with her that, every mom talks about, is just that, and that was something that was eye-opening for me too, like the shame part of it, because I am such a women supporting women person, but there are so many women out there where I feel like they say it, but it's not meant, or it's not coming from like a real place. And that in that moment, I was so less judgmental about, I think we all go through a phase where we're judgmental about people in general, or, you look over and you see a kid on an iPad before you have kids and you're like, oh, I'll never let, in a restaurant, oh, that won't be me.
I'm sorry, that person.
Like, cut to like 3 years later, I'm like, here's your iPad. But we can be so, when we have no idea what people are going through. And that was such a time for me. And I was so just insistent on just like, I don't care. I'm going to just pump for a year. And I would cry. Like, every time I pumped, I would just cry, because I would still get the flashbacks. It didn't go away. It's just that I wasn't experiencing them with her, which was how I was able to not affect her.
Dude, thank you so much for that story. I didn't know about the arm thing and looking in the mirror.
It's like, well, I have to do something for 20 minutes while I stand here.
But that's amazing. This is the shit, girl. This is the shit that people need to start talking about of how they handled it. Instead of feeling the shame of I wasn't able to breastfeed my child, it's like, fuck, you were given a deck of cards that was stacked against you. And yet, homie, you find yourself in this situation and you have a solution. It wasn't easy. You even just said, I was crying every day. So I'm not making out that it was freaking easy, but you did it. You made the pivot that was right for you and your child, which is freaking amazing. You didn't just go, no, you can do it and force yourself to do it. That's so damn important that you acknowledged your own feelings and you respected your own feelings, right? How much of your life hasn't been respected, hasn't been listened to, hasn't been heard. And the fact that you were like, no, I really feel this. I have to make a change. How do I make that change? And then how do I do it and build the confidence in me, even though it doesn't feel good right now? The other thing I wanted to talk to you about with triggers, though, is you said you found yourself, when things were going well, seeking out your triggers.
Yes.
What the hell is going on there? Explain to me why you think that happens and then how you recognized it so you stopped seeking them out.
It's waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is when you come from a family system that's so toxic, things cannot be good all the time. Something is going to happen to ruin this good thing. Like, this good thing is given to you. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I was convinced that she had every disease and that was just me going, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be, and I would go to the doctor way more than I should have. He's like, she's fine. She's healthy. I didn't truly, fully believe I deserved to be happy. And so when my life was going really well and when things were really happening in such a great way, I was like, well, certainly. And even with the book, even still now, this happens to me. It hasn't gone away. I'm okay, well, no one's going to read it, or it's not going to impact anybody, or no one's going to get anything from it. It's that voice inside of your head that you have to override constantly on a daily basis and speak to yourself. I have a picture of my little self when I was about 6 on my mirror in my bathroom, and I look at her every day and I talk to her every day. I do a lot of inner child work. I was very separate from her for a long time, which it was very detrimental, I think, for both of us. And she needed to heal and she needed to feel safe, and she didn't feel safe with me because I didn't feel safe with myself. And so when things were going well for me, I would do something to hurt that. Not anymore. I'm aware of it and I'm conscious of it. But when things first started going well for me, I would do that, yeah.
Speak to me about that awareness piece, if you don't mind.
It came later, and I talk about, in the prologue in the book, I talk about being on set very early on in my career and getting really badly hurt. And my face was all cut up, and it was that moment where everyone's like, go to the hospital, you gotta go to the hospital, you gotta go to the hospital. And I was like, no, I'm good. Just having that mentality of just, I'm good. I knew I wasn't good. I knew I needed stitches. I knew it was a disaster. I looked at myself in the mirror and I was in the trailer by myself, and I remember just like smiling and being happy and feeling like, yes, you deserve to have your face look like this. You deserve to have this happen to you. And you're gonna stay at work. It's like I was punishing myself, constantly punishing myself for things that I never did to myself, because I had somebody in my life who made me believe that I did not deserve to have a life.
And a big part, I assume, then, of what you've been doing is really building up your self-worth.
Yes.
How have you been doing that and not seeking external validation?
It's definitely a daily process. Definitely writing the book was a huge help for me in the sense of reading your words, reading your life on paper, or hearing, because I didn't read the audiobook, one of my actresses did, hearing my story coming from somebody else's mouth made me realize how bad my story was. I don't think I ever truly gave myself the space to go, wow, this was like really fucked up. And being able to read my words, being able to hear my story. And I remember when the audiobook was done and I just like went in my room, and it's, I think, a 5-hour or something. And I just sat there with my earphones in and I just like cried the entire time. And I was just like, you fucking did it. Like, you did it. You did all the things. You've done all the things that you said you were going to do. And it's been like really ugly. And I think that's the thing. Like, people can't be afraid of the ugly part. It's not pretty. It's not pretty to get through these things. And it's very easy to live in a space of, you're either going to be like a victim or you're going to be the opposite. And I chose to be the opposite. And I'm not going to be a victim in this story. I was his victim, but I am not a victim. And I refuse to allow him to have that power over me, no matter what is thrown at me in my life because of him, which is still very present and still happens. And a lot of times we just sort of get to a place where we're like, okay, well, this is what it is, and this is just my life, and it doesn't have to be. It does not have to be. And it does not matter how old you are. And it does not matter what has happened to you, because I do believe that we all have our stories and we all have our journeys to do. And if we don't do the work, we're the ones that suffer. And why are we going to suffer twice? Like, you're going to let that person let you suffer twice? You're going to let them do it to you and then you're going to do it to yourself for the rest of your life? Or are you going to let them have that kind of control over you? You know, what happened to me, I was a child. Now I'm an adult and I get to choose how the rest of this plays out and how this movie ends.
Dude, I love that so much. Like, I love that. But it's fucking hard work. Like you said earlier, it's a daily damn practice. Mm-hmm. So I actually heard you say, you know, your family, a lot of your family, they swept it under the rug.
Yes.
The problem is, in the short term, I think sweeping it under the rug is actually easier.
Yes, 100%.
So how do you, I don't want to say encourage people, that may not be the right word, but in situations like where some people listening right now have been sweeping it under the rug daily for 10, 20 years. And on every individual day, it feels better to sweep it under the rug than talk about what you're saying, where it's like you have to deal with the trauma, you have to let people go, you have to go and seek therapy. So how do you actually, like, what is that thing that people can hear right now to encourage them to take that step and stop sweeping it under the rug?
I think it feels easier to sweep it under the rug on a daily basis, but it actually is, in the long term, harder to do that, because then you have a mountain instead of a smaller hill of things to get through. Because if you keep doing that, then you have this massive thing to deal with instead of looking at things as they're happening and dealing with them in a positive way and trying to do all of the things that feel right for you. And like I said, for everyone, that's so different. But I do think that the longer you leave the rug there, the longer it's going to take to get it all out from underneath the rug.
Yeah, God. But in your story, like in what you're saying, so not sweeping it under the rug, if you don't mind actually sharing the story of when you were a child and your mum took you to the doctors because you had something on your face. Mm-hmm. That was, I think, a very early sign that you could have learned that sweeping it under the rug is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I was in 4th grade maybe, and I had herpes on my face. I didn't know it was herpes at the time. It was just like this massive cold sore, and I grew up in New York, so it was the winter time and it was extremely painful. And it took my mother a long time to take me to the doctor. And so by the time we went to the doctor, it was like pretty big and it was like cracking and bleeding and just, you know, I do now have memories of him actually giving it to me and giving it to me on purpose. It was a spoken about thing. It was something that he did that it was like, in his words, it was a gift to me. So yes, he was a sociopath. So my mom took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, it's herpes. And my mom's really good at dissociating because she had to be, because she was abused at such a young age, and she left her body and didn't have her memories until after he died, and she was almost 40. So when he said it to her and said the word, it was way too much for her to take in or even register. And so she just kind of grabbed, and I had no idea what the heck. I was just happy that there was a name for it. I'm like, okay, there's a name for it. There's got to be like medicine for it. And she just like grabbed me and took me out of dragged me out of the office. And that was that. And took me to a health food store after. And the guy at the health food store was like, oh, she has herpes. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what is her? Like, why is it, and gave me some sort of like ointment, but it was organic and it wasn't strong enough to deal with what I needed. I needed like actual medication for it. And it went untreated. And then I didn't get tested for it until later in my life, because obviously things were happening for a long time. And then obviously tested positive for it. And then again, because I've had it for so long, I rarely get sick. But when I got pregnant, I think because of my hormones, I was sick so I had it all, like through my entire pregnancy. I basically had it. So I wasn't able to give birth to her naturally.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
They can go blind.
What?
Apparently, if you have an outbreak.
Whoa.
If you have an outbreak, which
I had no idea.
Yeah, which you don't necessarily know if you do, because sometimes it's like internal and you can't see it. And so I was just not risking it, and I just did a C-section. So, obviously that was something again. So it was like, it felt like through my life there was a constant like, hey, I'm still here. I'm dead, but I'm still here, and I'm still gonna, like, this is still gonna happen. And I couldn't take medicine for it while I was pregnant because the medicine is super strong. So I just had to sort of deal with it. And, I use ice or whatever I needed to do to make myself feel less pain. And
what were you doing mentally because it didn't even dawn on me that would be the thing that I was like, oh, he's still here. How do you mentally work through that?
Through my psychedelic journeys, I've been able to work through that more than through any type of like therapy work, I feel like, because I was able to take a really deep dive into, it takes away your fight or flight, and you do it with a doctor, and it's in a very, safe environment, and you do therapy before with the doctor and do therapy after. And I was able to really take a deep dive into what had really happened to me. I had a lot of memories like during my experiences, and a lot of things came out, a lot of things came to fruition that I just, I've always like hated houseplants. It's like very random, but I've always hated houseplants. Could never like figure out why. They were just always, I'm like, why would you have a plant in your house? I just didn't get it. I was like, we're trying to keep the dirt outside, and now we're bringing dirt inside, and there's all this plant. And I never and my husband, I met him, when I met my husband, I go in his house, he's got a freaking bunch of houseplants. He's like, these things are terrible. Like, no one wants, he's like, no, it's like good for the air. I was like, I don't care. I don't want a houseplant. Anyway, my grandparents had a cactus in their home, and my grandfather he had kicked me into the cactus when I was younger. And by the way, like, who has a cactus in their home? I mean, it was like a cactus. It was like a large cactus. It wasn't just, like a little tiny like plant. And I remembered that in one of my sessions. And so now here I have this daughter who's like a nature freak, and all she wants is plants. And so before I did my psychedelics and I, was confronted with, Mommy, let's go to the plant store. I want to buy a bunch of plants. And I'm like, oh, no, we're not buying plants. And here's another way of, I had no idea because I hadn't remembered, but I'm like, you're not bringing a plant in this house. And she's like, Mommy, it's like the earth. Like, how do you say no to that? It's like, she was like 7. She's like, it's the earth, Mom. I'm like part of the earth. So I started slowly letting her have plants. Yes, you can have a plant. Now she has 45 plants in her
Jesus.
room. She's named them all. She like literally has named all of them. Her first plant was a plant that was given to me, like an orchid, like one of those orchids, and I killed it. And she's like, Mom, I am taking this plant. And she brought it back to life, and she named it Survivor. And I have it tattooed on me.
Oh my God, I love that.
Like, she wrote that, and so I took her writing and I tattooed it on me. And so that was like the beginning of my plant journey. Wow. And so then I remembered it in my psychedelic experience, and now we just have plants everywhere.
Wow, I love that story. I had no idea. That's so beautiful. How have you forgiven your mum?
I haven't. I don't necessarily believe in the whole forgiveness thing. I think it's like a crock of shit, to be honest with you.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside.
I don't believe you need to forgive something that's unforgivable in order to be at peace with yourself. I don't think that what he did to me is something that's forgivable. I don't think that my parents being absent in all of it is forgivable, because they could have saved me and they didn't.
Because I believe your mum walked in on you as well,
Yes.
or on you
Yes.
and your grandfather.
Yes. And he had so much power over her and had groomed her since she was the age of probably similar to me. And so my mom leaves her body a lot, and I can see when it happens. She just completely, like, when things get too much, she's like completely dissociates. Like, that's how she survives. That's how she handles it. And my mom has done a lot of work, and we've had a lot of conversations, and we talk a lot about it, but I will never forgive my parents for what happened to me. And I will never forgive him for what happened to me, or my grandmother, or any other adult who was around who knew who he was and didn't do anything.
Dude, talk to me about that further. Like, I actually love, like, no, I'm not gonna fucking forgive him. Like, it's atrocious. I didn't deserve it, and there's no going back. There's a lot of power in that. And at the same time, I've heard people say, but then you can't move on. So talk to me about that. You're shaking your head.
No, I've moved on. I've totally moved on without forgiving. And actually, I feel more powerful in being able to say that I don't forgive you. And look what I can still do with my life, even though everyone has their opinions on, oh, I need to forgive to move on, or I don't need to. And I don't judge anyone for their process and whatever they need to do for them that makes sense. But for me, I never felt like, oh, I've got to get to a place of forgiveness. And he put me through fucking hell. I do not need to forgive that. And I do not need to forgive anybody who was a participant in any way. And there's a scene in the end of the book where I see my grandmother at a party for the last time. I was at my aunt's house and my grandmother was there. And she wanted to take a picture with my daughter. And my aunt asked, Grandma wants to take a picture with your daughter. And I just said, no. Because she's a predator just like he was, in my mind.
Because she knew it the whole time.
I believe she knew it the whole time. I mean, I was 6 years old, 5 o'clock in the morning at their house, coming out of the shower. She's standing right there, doesn't ask any questions. You are an active participant in what's happening here. And until the day she died, wore his wedding ring around her neck, carried a mug that said, I love my husband, like had a shrine in her house that was just pictures of him. like put it still when she knew everything. So I believe she always knew everything. And there was a confession letter that he wrote that was found after he died. And so, yeah, no, I don't forgive any of them.
Oh my God. The trust element, girl, like I so applaud you for being able to build back up. Like really, your book and just everything that we're talking about, it's like for you to be so strong and sit here, fuck, like it's so deep and so powerful. So just thank you for just everything, all of your vulnerability. And one of the things I really wanted to ask you though is, as you were talking about your ex-husband and now your new husband, well, I guess not new, but your more recent husband, you talk about the fact that you had to learn intimacy. And I was like, God, it wouldn't have dawned on me, but talk to me about that, because when I think about people who have been especially sexually abused, I know that that's a big thing of how do you let go? How do you give yourself over to your partner again? I've done a lot of episodes with sex experts and hormone doctors, and you know, the idea of a woman being able to orgasm and orgasm being amazing for your health. And now the fact that the one big thing that a woman needs to orgasm is trust. Talk to me about that and how you started to learn to get comfortable and intimate with your husband.
Well, for me, it was always easier with people that I didn't love or I didn't necessarily trust, or people that I just met. Sex was always easier for me with those kind of people.
Including orgasms?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Because my very early experiences of my sexual experiences came from a person that I hated. So that's what felt comfortable for me and felt like I recognized. So with my husband now, who's like the kindest person on the planet, and we still work through, it's a process. Like it's still something that we have to work at and work through and be conscious of, because it's not, I don't think that's something that ever goes away.
Oh, yeah, I mean, when you talk about it in your book, about how you, like slowly, how you meet him and how you let him know about your past. So for anyone listening, like they should definitely go read your book and read that part of it, because I think it's super powerful. To think through anyone right now that may be thinking, oh, I can never be intimate again. And whether that means actually sex or orgasm or just being openly emotional, right? Being open, vulnerable and trusting somebody with your, whether it's a secret or a vulnerability, let's just call it that, is somewhat risky, especially if you've been somebody who has trust issues or has been abused before.
Yes. I don't have the full answer to that. I think that's ever growing. And I think it's something that we will always be working on and talking about. And he's always worried about me and how, if I'm okay and if everything's okay. And that can be hard too, because then it's hard to be intimate when you have the other person's, I can feel his concern about me. And so it's an ongoing conversation, I feel like. And we've definitely have our ebbs and flows with it. I think like every relationship does. And I just, talking about it, like I'm just a big talker. And that comes from living in a secret my whole life. I just feel like let's talk about it. And that makes things easier to be able just to vocalize how you're feeling, whatever that is and whatever that looks like, and even to vocalize how I feel he feels with me. And he sometimes doesn't feel safe with me in the sense of that he's hurting me, or that he might be bringing things up for me, or that I'm uncomfortable. And so that's like a whole other layer of it, of working through it. The more that I surround myself with strong, positive women, the stronger I become. And the more that I shed the women in my life that are not aligned with my journey, as much as I love them, the stronger I become in myself. And for me, Cameron was the first person in my life that showed me that.
That's Cameron Diaz.
Cameron Diaz. Because she was this powerful, incredible woman who I had the honor of doubling and becoming friends with, and just watching her move through her day and how she connected with people, I realized how disconnected I was with people, and how she looked everyone in the eye, which is something that I really struggled with, which I think a lot of people that are abused struggle with, the looking someone in the eye when you have a conversation because you feel uncomfortable or you don't feel secure with yourself, and so you're constantly looking away or don't feel confident about the words that are coming out of your mouth, or that you're being judged and all of these things. And watching her had taught me so much. And obviously through the book process of me writing the book, she was such a strong pillar for me to be there for me. And I lean on those people a lot in my life now. And I find that that is what gives me a lot of power.
Oh, I love that so much. Being around powerful women, I'm the same. Like, it gives me the energy. And then thank you for being honest about the intimacy part, because it's the thing that a lot of people don't talk about, and I think it really does make a difference. And not that this is even remotely the same, but when I had massive gut issues, like I was like 20 pounds lighter than I was now.
Wow.
I could barely eat anything at all. I couldn't stand up for longer than 5 minutes at a time because my gut was in such disarray. It was like inflamed that it looked like I was like pregnant up top, like on the top half of my belly. And so you can imagine intimacy and sex was very hard for me. And to your point of my husband always asking, are you okay? Am I hurting you? Was triggering for me, because here I am trying not to think about how much pain I'm in. I'm trying to be engaged with my husband. It isn't sexy that he's asking me, but it's very sweet and kind. Mm-hmm. But now it throws you out of the mood. And so again, not that it's the same, but it does become, and then my solution really was the honesty piece as well. Just keep talking through it. And sometimes I'd be like, please, just stop asking, right? Like, I would have code words where it's like, I just need you to stop asking because I'm fine. And I just need a quick word to tell you that I'm fine. And so these types of communications, when you're dealing with things like this, I think is so imperative. That brings you closer together versus pulls you apart.
Yes, completely. And I think that it is similar in the sense of we all have our own things that we go through, right? And so intimacy, especially when you're with someone for a long time, can get really tricky, because you do get to a point where you're with, you meet them and, you're having sex all the time and that's just what it is. And then things slow down, and especially if you have children, and it shifts. And so I think it is really important to make your partner the number one person, even if it's not all of the time, most of the time, especially when you do have children, and especially when you do have trauma or issues surrounding intimacy or surrounding, being sexual with them, because it is something that sometimes you need to have conversations through it. And then you get to, also there's those points where you don't do it for a while, and then you don't do it for a while, and then you don't do it for a while, and then you're just like, we haven't done it for a while. And so it's that too. And then recognizing in me, okay, what's coming up for me in my world that doesn't feel good or right, or that I even want to, and I think that's something that's really common when we get to a point where we're in love with someone and we're in a relationship with someone. And I talk about this in the book. In my 20s, when I was just really sort of promiscuous and making really bad decisions and having sex with whoever, which I think a lot of us have gone through, a lot of us haven't. A lot of abused women, it's something that is very common in women that have been abused, because you just feel like your body isn't yours, and so you're just sort of using it in any way. And I went through that stage, and that felt very comfortable to me, where now it would not, because I'm in a completely different space, thank God. But then it did, and then it was something that I use as a coping mechanism to make me feel better about myself. Like, oh, I'm attractive to all of these men. That must mean that I'm worth something.
God, in reading your book and everything that we're talking about, I've actually gone back and thought about the young girls in my school. And there was a couple, one specifically, that slept around.
Yeah.
You know, everyone was like, oh, she's the slut. She's the one that does the drugs. Dude, now my empathy, I'm just like, oh my God, I need to find her. I need to but the thought of when you're younger, people, at least society's changing, where people like you, holy smokes, God, the fact that you're willing to talk about this on this show, in your book, I really do believe will start to change lives. But growing up, you know, I'm 44 or 43, so growing up, no one was talking about this.
No.
And so the generation that I lived in of how many women went through this and now carrying it into their adulthood, and it's echoing in everything they do, everything that they, you know, as we started with the relationships they're building, is so damn heartbreaking. And it now makes me look at children differently. I think you even say in the book, like when a kid's crying in the corner for 7 hours because they don't want to see Uncle Bob, freaking pay attention.
Yeah. And also, you know, they don't need to hug Uncle Bob either. Like, that's a huge thing too. You know, we have a friend of ours who's always, and he's a great friend, but he's always like, give Kim a hug, give Uncle Kim. Like, no, he doesn't have to do any of those things. Like, if they want to hug you, they'll hug you. And I'm that way with my daughter. I don't ever say that to her. However she chooses to interact with an adult, and I think that that's a huge thing too, is I grew up in a generation similar where it was kind of like, you know, we don't ask questions about what adults say. What they say goes. This is what they're, oh, by the way, there is no reason. You're like, why? Well, because.
Yeah,
because I said so. Because I said so. Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. Like, why are we doing this? Because this is what we do. Okay, makes absolutely no sense. And then you know, make sure you hug your grandfather goodbye. Make sure you hug your grandmother goodbye. If they want to hug them, they will hug them. If they don't want to, there is a reason. And you need to pay attention to those cues. And you need to pay attention to the fact that I don't care who you trust in your family. You do not fully ever trust anyone. It's a horrible thing to say in the sense of you want to, like as a human being, you want to always fully trust people. You want to always fully have that feeling. But especially for me, when you've been through something like I have, I'm very particular on who my daughter spends time with, who I allow her at whose home, and that's for a reason. You know, you never know what uncle might be hanging around wherever or whatever, and you know, it takes 1 second to change a child's life.
And I heard you say that you're teaching your child boundaries from now, so that when they're younger, so that because how much have you had to unwire, girl, like your entire life?
Yeah,
you
I
know,
didn't know what boundaries were till I was like 35.
Right.
I was like, wait, what is that about? Like, what's a boundary?
Like, I can actually say that? I can actually tell someone no?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, you become a people pleaser because you just think that you need to do all these things. And yeah, we talk about boundaries. We talk about her body. She, you know, she's in Taekwondo.
Yeah,
like,
she's saying that. I'm like, fuck yeah.
And like many reasons why. I'm actually slightly starting to get a little bit afraid of her. I'm like, wow, she's...
Aren't you like a black belt or something?
I am a black belt, yes.
That's fucking epic.
But she's like, kicks really hard. And I'm like, no, mommy, we don't practice on mommy. No, thank you. And then she actually came home from school. I wouldn't say the child's name, but she said, so-and-so was hitting me on the shoulder today, Mom. And I said, okay. She said, you know, it wasn't just one boundary. It was like 4 boundaries that she broke. And I was just like, took a moment where I was like, I've created this. This is amazing. And I said, okay. And what did you do? And she said, well, I told her to stop. And I said, okay. And she didn't listen. And so I punched her in the stomach. And I said, great. Because
she didn't listen.
She didn't listen. She was putting her hands on you. And I want her to understand if someone puts their hands on you, no matter who it is, and you ask, please don't touch me, and they continue to touch you, that you do whatever you need to do to make them stop touching you.
Wow.
And that goes for huge levels. I mean, that's a small level of, obviously, it was another girl. They're probably just being annoying and being kids. But it speaks to a bigger situation, right, that she might be in with an adult. And I say that to her as well. Just because there's adults in your life that are teachers, that you're supposed to look up to, that you're supposed to respect, that you're supposed to feel these things, does not mean that they deserve your respect, does not mean they deserve to be looked up to until they prove themselves to you. And then even then, sometimes they will turn around and do something to you that's hurtful. And if they do, you have my full permission to take care of yourself, and you will never be in trouble for that, for protecting yourself and taking care of yourself. Because for so many years, we have this idea that because you're an adult, there just aren't rules for you.
Yeah. Your next book needs to be about book for kids, by the way,
right?
Of how to set boundaries.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And then as I was thinking about, I grew up in, and I'm sure you did as well, grew up in a generation where it's like, no, if a boy tugs on your hair or if he pushes you down in the place, it means he likes you.
Yeah.
Now think about the freaking messaging of why so many of us ended up in these terribly toxic relationships. Because from a child, you're taught that if they hurt you, it just means they like you.
Yes. The messaging is completely,
Yeah.
they were completely off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's rewiring that as, if you choose to have children in your life, like rewiring that. And even if you choose not to have children in your life, you might have nieces or nephews or people that, I don't want me to be the only person in my child's life that she looks up to as a woman. That's why it's so important for me that I have women around her that I think are amazing and that I know will have my same thought process and patterns, because I want her to hear it from other people. I don't want her to just hear it from me. I want her to hear it from, all walks of life and she's doing it. And the days that I question myself or feel like, am I doing a good job? And then she comes home and she's like, she broke 3 boundaries today. I'm like, yep, you're doing it, Kim. It's happening.
That's so amazing. Where can people find you, your book? Girl, it's just so freaking amazing.
On Amazon, I feel like is the easiest thing for everybody, but it's on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Nobles, but I feel like they don't carry as Amazon. I feel like it's the best
Go to
place.
Amazon.
Go to Amazon.
Glimmer on Amazon. And where can they follow you?
I really just do Instagram, and it's the longest handler on the planet.
It pretty much is.
Literally, Kimberly Shannon Murphy stunts. It's like so obnoxious.
But dude, if anyone wants to go, your stunts are freaking epic. So guys, you gotta go check her out. You gotta check out her book, Glimmer. I'm telling you, it so freaking empowered me. This was a really hard episode for us to discuss, at least for me, because it's a very sensitive subject, and to try not to trigger anyone that's listening or watching is very important. Why? Because we're actually looking for you to make change. The reason why she wrote this book was to actually give you guys the tools to know that you're not alone. And guys, if you're not subscribed, click that subscribe button down there. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace out, guys. Click here right now, guys, to learn how to set the boundaries to avoid anyone manipulating you or betraying you.
I'm not going to set a boundary with the intention of getting someone else's behavior towards me to change. I'm going to set a boundary because I know my value, I know my worth,